So you want to be a game master. Fantastic. Come on in, pull up a chair and take a load off, because today I'll be talking about Session 0 and rolling up player characters right after this. Howdy, 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 gang. Welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. As mentioned in the open, I am going to be talking about Session 0, or what we simply used to refer to as rolling up characters when I first got involved in role-playing games. But first, I do want to point out, if you are not familiar with me or this series, I have been running role-playing games for over 40 years. Yes, I know, I'm old, but not too old. And of course, over all that time, I have picked up some tips, some best practices, some thoughts about how to get the most out of your role-playing games. And I want to share them with you because, in my opinion, the most daunting task in tabletop gaming, bar none, is being a game master. It really is. It can be a lot of work, and it can be a hell of a lot of fun. But I want to share ways that you can get the most out of your gaming sessions around the table. We've already talked about ways to decide what's the best role-playing game for your group, table etiquette and setting ground rules, and so on. And now we've gotten to the point where we're ready to start rolling up characters. So let me share some thoughts with you about what I think are the best ways to be rolling up the new player characters. First off, if you are around a table, or if you are doing this virtually, doing everything with digital assets, regardless, I recommend that you make sure that you get as much character creation information in front of your players prior to Session 0. Now, I know most of your players, maybe not most, but some of your players will not take a look at anything that you send them. You're the game master. It's all supposed to be up to you. Well, you're going to nip that attitude right in the bud as fast as you can. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But I always like to make sure that I at least give my players some options, some things to chew on before we get together for creating the player characters. I also recommend, regardless if you're doing it virtually or if you're around a table, that the first time with your group and the first time with a particular role-playing game, have everybody roll up their characters together at the same time. I know there are loads of people out there, especially who play 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, 2nd edition Pathfinder. They love to craft their characters at home and have everything just, okay, this is I rolled all this up, and this is the character I want. And I get that. I completely understand that. I mean, the whole thing about backstory being super important to a lot of role players out there these days, which personally I don't understand, because I like the backstory for my characters to evolve from the actual adventures, not something I cooked up with, never playing the game. But you can get a better group dynamic if everybody's rolling up characters together. And we'll talk about group dynamic in just a moment. But try your best to at least get some character creation information in front of your players before you sit down for Session 0. Now, if that means, say you're playing basic fantasy role-playing, well, that's all free. So that's super easy. All you got to do is send the link to your friends, family, whoever's going to play, or just download the PDFs and send them the PDF. Also, say you're going to play maybe Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons. You have SRDs available out there. Very little artwork. A lot of times they don't have, every aspect of the game, obviously enough. They're basically reference documents, but it still gives your players a leg up. So you're not sitting down for session 0 and they're all absolutely clueless as to what they want to do. If you're using a PDF, then by all means, feel free, print out the player character section where you're, creating characters, as long as it's not dozens of pages long. So I always try to have information available to the players ahead of time so that they're not all sitting around the table trying to figure out, what do I want to play? What sort of character do I want? Something else, if you're gathered around a table, have plenty of dice. And then have more dice. Always have loads and loads of dice. You do not want to sit there trying to roll up characters, especially if it's a 3 to 18 range, and you have 3 6-sided dice. Now, granted, of course, there are apps out there that you can roll dice on the app. I'm not a big fan of having phones at my table, but if I need to, I'm okay with people using apps to roll dice. That's not a problem. If you're, of course, playing on a virtual tabletop, you've already got that built in. You've got all the dice rolling built in for you as well. So as you're going to go through creating the character, you want to make sure that you have a firm understanding of the attribute creation, right? So when players, I should say, are rolling up their attributes, you want to know how do they go about doing it. So as an example, for Dungeons and Dragons, there's a multitude of different ways that you can come up with your attribute scores, all the way to just having assigned numbers, specific numbers that you can use, and you can place them in whatever attribute you want, right? But if you go back to like the old school, you'd be looking at, okay, well, you roll 3 6-sided dice, and whatever you roll, that's what you get. And if you get a 3, you got a 3. Sorry, man, your wisdom's a 3. I don't know what to tell you. So know which way you're going to lean with that. So for an example, one way, especially in the 3 to 18 range, that a lot of people utilize is roll 4 6-sided dice, drop the lowest score. Tends to give you a much higher average for the various characters, a bit stronger and more intelligent and faster and wiser and more charismatic than the average Jane and Joe, but that's also a way to do it. Always know before you sit down at the table how you're going to go about generating these attribute scores, because you don't want one person going about it one way, somebody else going about it another way, or you start off saying, okay, we're going to do it this way, and then all of a sudden it's like, wow, everybody's rolling like 5s and 6s. Okay, let's change that up. Have something in mind, stick with it, is what I definitely will recommend. So let's talk a little bit about group dynamics, because you want to also have an understanding of the sort of group, well, I guess I don't want to necessarily say dynamic, group makeup, I guess we'll say, as far as the adventure you're about to run. So I always recommend that before you have everybody sit down and start rolling up characters, that you already have your first adventure picked out and you've already at least looked it over, so that you understand what sort of group is going to be best to tackle that adventure. So if you are going to run, say, Call of Cthulhu, and the adventure has a lot of investigation, and you need people who understand hieroglyphics and can read Egyptian and all these other things, you're not going to want to have a group of 4 two-fisted brawlers trying to advance through this adventure, because it isn't going to happen. Tain't going to happen, Dooley. So it's important to understand the kind of dynamic, the kind of makeup that the group should have. That said, don't force players into playing characters they do not want to play. Plus, don't go overboard with the group makeup either. Because one of the problems that 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons had was that people felt that it came across too much like an MMORPG. That you needed to have the tank, you had to have the damage dealer, and you had to have the ranged combat, and then you had your healer. In some ways, that's always kind of been the case with role-playing games. But 4E really pushed it to where you might as well have been playing World of Warcraft as a group. Don't want to do that. So let's go back to not forcing players to play characters that they don't want to. I'll tell you, if you force somebody to play a character that they have absolutely no interest in playing outside of just a one-shot adventure, they are going to resent that. And they are not going to be too happy, and they are not going to be pleasant at the game table. Get ready to have to sit there and struggle with them every time you sit down to play, and they've still got that character. It's just not worth it. So if you've got a group of 4 players and you're playing an old school fantasy role-playing game and your group wants to have 3 fighters and a cleric, go ahead. Go ahead, enjoy. What will eventually happen is that your players will realize, we don't have the best group dynamic, and that's the reason why we're not doing so well with these adventures. And we tend to get killed by traps, and we don't have anybody who can cast like offensive magic. They'll learn as they go. So that's fine. All right. So something else you want to keep in mind too is that allow your players to make their own choices, but also point out that the onus on their player character is on them. Because you've got enough things on your plate that you've got to worry about running the game. You don't need the added responsibility of running their character too. So if you're playing with a group and you've got group players with like magic skills or magic spells or special abilities, those players need to understand what those abilities do, what those spells do. It is not your responsibility to tell them how to play their character because you got way more important things to worry about. Give you an example. If, for, say, in a game of Call of Cthulhu, if a player character is an academic, he's a professor, and he's basically has all these like educational skills, right? But he's, physically weak. Every time that the players need to do some library study, I am not going to point out to the group that, hey, this professor character, this academic, should be handling the library use. Players need to understand what their characters can do. What is the specialty of that character? They created that character, so they should know. Same thing with fantasy role-playing games, magic users. The players need to know what those spells do. Now, I don't mean they're going to know what they do right off the bat, but they need to have a good understanding so that you're not sitting there in the middle of running a game and having various different players sitting there saying to you, what should I do? That is not role-playing, right? The game master is supposed to be sitting there asking, what do you do? Not the players asking, what should I do? Yes. So, plus, as soon as you make sure that your players understand that they need to have a grasp on what their characters can do, you will find they will take it upon themselves to try to figure out ways to milk the most out of those characters' abilities as they possibly can. If you sit there and you help them out all the time by going, oh, no, you should be using this. Hey, how come you don't do this? Why don't you cast this spell? Oh, you got a grenade. You should use your grenade. Then they'll always expect you to do that. And I got to be honest, those players won't be having a very good time either. All right. So, final thing I do want to point out, too, as far as Session 0 is if you're buying equipment, if you're equipping the characters during session 0. Now, sometimes some game masters wait until the beginning of the first adventure to do the equipping of characters. Sometimes it can be very, very quick, very easy as far as character creation and equipping them. Other times it can take quite a bit of time. So I'll give you a great example. If you're playing Traveler, you're going to invest some time into creating your character because you're basically covering practically everything that's happened to them in their lives up to that point. Same with Dungeons and Dragons, more so with second edition Pathfinder because of all the various feats in that. You're going to invest a good amount of time in session 0. Now, there are games out there where you roll a few dice, get your attributes, and then you have specific equipment assigned to you, and boom, you're off to go. Case like that, I would just have session 0 right before the actual adventure kicked off. But regardless, when you are equipping the characters, be stingy. It's so much easier to become more generous with the goodies as the game progresses, as opposed to giving the player characters some really cool stuff really early on that completely unbalances the game and makes it a cakewalk. You don't want your adventures to be a cakewalk. And I have played with a couple of game masters in the past, a long time ago, actually. And it was sort of like they just handed everything out. Handed everything out. I want to say I was playing basic Dungeons and Dragons, the BX basic. And I was second level and had a Vorpal sword and a flying carpet. I mean, come on. It's ridiculous. Now, granted, I didn't get those right off the bat. So be stingy. You know, make your player characters work for that equipment. Don't be sitting there loading up the fighters with plate mail right off the bat. Give them some leather armor. Make them earn that mail. So, anyway, all right. So those are some thoughts about your session 0 and rolling up your first group of characters at the game table or remotely as well. My next episode, I'm going to talk about selecting your first adventure to share with your players. So hopefully you'll join me for that next week. All right. If you happen to like this video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, ding that bell. So it'll not only let you know when I upload videos in the So You Want to Be a Game Master series, it'll also let you know when I upload other videos, and it'll tell you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs live right here on YouTube, Monday through Thursday nights, as I bring you the latest in tabletop gaming news. That's it for this time out. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer. Thank you so much for joining me. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more. And as I sign off all of my videos during this never-ending pandemic, here's hoping all of you out there are being smart and staying safe. Oh, hey, you're still here. Well, if that's the case, by all means, if you haven't subscribed to the Gaming Gang channel yet, click right here. If you'd like to see the latest episode of the Gaming Gang Dispatch, click right up there. And if you want to trust YouTube's algorithm to give you something to watch, click right there. Once again, thanks so much for watching, and everybody please wear a mask.